Hello, everyone. My name is Kate, and I am an educational coach here at Mile High Early Learning. Today, I'm going to be talking with you about how you can support the lead teacher in your classroom by taking observations. Let's go. So before we dive in, let's go over our game plan here. So first, we will understand why we use observation in the classroom. Then we're going to move right along and learn how to take a proper observation. And then we will learn the difference between subjective and objective observations. After that, we will discuss how you can support the lead teachers by sharing your observations with them. And then I'll explain how teachers use those observations for their TSGs and their lesson planning. And last but not least, I will share some tips and tricks for taking observations. So, why do we observe? There are many reasons for why we observe children that we are working with. Ideally, we want to notice what strategies children are using for creating desired effects, so basically how they problem solve. We want to discover their skills and their accomplishments, and we want to gain a better understanding of their personalities and their temperaments. The two reasons why we observe children that are most important to remember in the context of this webinar are this. We want to find their interests, and we want to understand their levels of development. Okay? It is super important to find out what the students are interested in, because then the lead teacher can create lessons that relate to their interests. So think about yourself as an adult. Would you be engaged in learning if someone gave you a training about quantum physics? Or would you prefer to learn something new about one of your favorite hobbies and be given time to practice those new skills? Okay, children are the same way. We want them to ask questions, we want them to wonder and to enjoy the process of learning. So understanding their levels of development is also important because we want to make sure that we know when children are needing extra support or needing more of a challenge. So by tracking their levels of development throughout the school year, we can see if they are gaining the skills they need to be successful, both physically and mentally. If they're not showing growth in certain areas, we can begin to look more closely at our teaching approaches. And we can also look for any red flags that might signal a child needing more supports in the classroom. Okay? So always remember, we want to find their interests and we want to understand their levels of development. So how do we observe? Observations can come in many different forms. You can use video, which is something that we use a lot at Mile High for our TSGs. And although it can be uncomfortable at first, it is also helpful to take video recordings of yourself in the classroom. Observing your own behaviors and interactions can be very, very eye-opening. Okay, another form are pictures. And they're great for capturing quick moments that can jog your memory later, and they're useful for when you want to display documentation in the classroom in the hallway to share what your children are learning. Another form would be voice recording. These can be very helpful when you want to capture a moment, but you don't want the children or yourself to be distracted by the camera. They're also great for smaller groups or interactions between just a few children. And the last form of observation that I want to address is the most accessible, and it is personally the one I use the most, and that is written notes. It is extremely helpful to carry around a pen and a small notepad, or if you don't want to buy a notepad or you don't have one, you can just make your own by cutting up some smaller squares of paper and then stapling them together. And now that we have these great big smocks with big pockets, it should make carrying a notepad around even easier. Okay, so make sure you write down the date and the time. The date is important for teachers when they're putting in their observations into TSGs because teachers have to write down the date when the observation happened. And the time is important for tracking when the event happened in the context of your day. So if you wrote an observation and you wrote down that it was happening at 10:30, and then you look back on it and you remember, oh, 10:30 is the time when we start transitioning during cleanup time. So that way when you look back, you'll know exactly when during the day that it happened. And just a side note, oftentimes when I am immersed in a learning experience with children, something great will start happening and I will just grab whatever is in reach if I don't have a notepad or the iPad. And so it could be a scrap piece of paper that you find on the floor from Karen's investigation with scissors and she forgot to clean up, or a broken crayon from the crayon basket that's been neglected for months. If you can use it, use it. So when you are writing your observation, there are a few things that are important to remember. First is you always want to write in the present tense. You don't want to say, Johnny walked over to the shelf. You want to write, Johnny is walking towards the shelf. Okay? Never use labels. We don't want to label children. Like, we don't want to call them stubborn, polite, cute, rude, smart, aggressive. And also be specific, especially when you're describing quantities. So if a child is picking up some blocks in the block area, you don't say Dylan picked up a few blocks. Instead, you should write down Dylan picked up 4 blocks. Lastly, only write what you can see and what you can hear. It would be great if we were all telepathic and could see what the children are thinking, but we are not. And therefore, we can only observe what is directly in front of us. So only write what you can see and what you can hear. For example, let's say a teacher reminds Karen to clean up the scrap paper in the art area from her scissor investigation that I mentioned earlier, from when you grab a scrap paper off the floor to write an observation on it. And Karen has left her scraps of paper on the floor. So here's the observation that follows. Karen was angry when I reminded her to clean up. She threw a tantrum and complained about it being too much work. Then she went to the cozy corner and ignored me by looking at a book. This is called a subjective observation, and there are many things that are wrong with it, so let's talk about it. First of all, it is written in the past tense, and there is no context available. We have no idea when this observation occurred. There was no time, no date, and we have no idea where they were in the classroom. It's lacking any sort of usable data for analyzation, and there are a ton of assumptions going on about what Karen thinks and what Karen feels. Okay, this teacher is not telepathic and cannot see Karen's mental process. When you read back an observation that you have taken, you should be able to say to yourself, how do I know this? And then you should be able to respond to that question by saying, it is what I saw and it is what I heard. It is not my interpretation. So by just writing down Karen's actions, what you can physically see and hear, the teacher will then take a much more appropriate observation that provides way more information that can be analyzed later during reflection. So let's take a look at a more appropriate version of this observation. So it is June 12th, it is 8:50 in the morning. It's cleanup time and I'm standing in the art area. I have just reminded Karen to clean up her work. Okay, so we have a date, we have a time, and we have a context so we know what is happening. Okay? Karen's eyebrows are furrowed and her mouth is turned downward. Her hands are curled into fists. She stomps one foot and shouts, I can't do that. That's too much work for me. She turns her body around and walks to the cozy corner. She sits down, takes a book from the shelf, looks at the cover, and begins turning the pages from left to right. So this observation is written in the present tense, and it contains only descriptions of what the teacher saw and what the teacher heard. And that is called an objective observation because it's leaving out any judgment of Karen. So if we take observations this way, we can obtain much more telling data about the children that we work with. So now that we know how to take an observation, let's talk about when to take an observation. There are a lot of rich moments that happen throughout the day in the classroom. But if we are constantly caught up in recording videos or jotting notes, we miss out on being present with children. So knowing what to look for comes with some time and experience, but there are a few indicators that can help you decide if it's a good time to pull out your notebook or the iPad. So let's take a closer look at those indicators. The first is children engaged and work together. So whenever you notice a smaller group of children working together, you are very likely to find some observable moments. It's important to look for their abilities to have conversations, their willingness to take turns, or look for their body language and their interactions if you're observing infants or toddlers. So whenever you see children engaged and work together, you are very likely to find an observable moment. The next is anytime you are outside. If you are outside with children, you are usually either on the playground or exploring nature, perhaps both if your outdoor space allows for it. Teachers must collect data about each child's physical development, and everything that they do outside is worth noticing. It's balancing, throwing, catching, climbing, running, jumping, the list goes on and on. Their investigations of nature are also very important. Whether it's winter time and they're noticing the way that ice forms on the ground, or it's summertime and they're collecting roly-polies. Write down their questions and their thoughts. Everything that happens outside is pretty much observable. The next time would be at breakfast, lunch, and snack. Meal times are ripe with conversations that reveal children's theories, their questions, and their imaginations. So when they use utensils or pass a bowl in non-COVID times when we were doing family style, we could learn a lot more about their fine motor skills, which is just a technical term for their strength and control when they're using their fingers, hands, and their wrists. It's a great time to notice their interactions with each other, to build relationships with them, to connect with them, and it's just a great time to take some observation. Lastly, we can always find observable moments during transitions. We all know that transitions can be a hectic time, but they can also inform us about how children manage classroom routines, how they interact with the materials and the environment, and how effective a teacher's transition strategies are. So, you remember Karen? That interaction took place during the cleanup transition time. It's a great time to look for some observable moments. Now, let's pretend that you are the person who wrote down that great objective observation of Karen. What do you do with it now? Let's find out. First, you should take that observation to the lead teacher and anyone else that is on your team. Find a time during the day when you can talk about the observation together, such as nap time or once all of the children have gone home. You need to find out if your team members have had similar interactions with Karen, and do not be afraid to ask questions like, what do you think this means? Or why do you think Karen reacted this way? I just want to say that throughout my years in early childhood education, I have worked with a wide range of teachers. And I can tell you that not every teacher is easy to work with. Teaching moments that are both successful and fulfilling can happen, but it takes two very important ingredients, which are reflection and communication. So you may be working with a teacher who discusses their thoughts and their plans with you and maybe even asks for your input. Or you may be supporting a teacher that is not comfortable in the practice of working as a team, which leaves you feeling a bit left out and hesitant to speak up. But no matter what your situation is, I'm here to tell you that you are an important member of the team. Your observations can help paint a much clearer picture of what is happening in the classroom. And you may be seeing or hearing things that could help strengthen the teacher's lesson plans or provide some insight into the developmental levels of the children. So always try your hardest to communicate and share and ask questions with all of the people on your team. So after talking to your team members about your observations, the lead teacher can take that observation and use it for two important things: TSGs and lesson planning. TSGs are a useful tool for teachers to track each child's developmental levels. TSGs have categories of development such as social, emotional, physical, the arts, science, etc. So in the observation that you took of Karen, you noticed that she turned the pages of the book from right to left, which is quoted right up here. She sits down, takes a book from the shelf, looks at the cover, and begins turning the pages from right to left. So this is something that the lead teacher can use for the literacy category in TSGs. So the teacher will put the observation into Karen's TSG profile and will be able to score her under the level 4 progression based on her ability to turn the pages from the front of the book to the back. So it says under number 4, orients book correctly, turns pages from the front of the book to the back, recognizes the familiar books by their covers. The teacher will be able to score Karen in that category. By reflecting on the observation that you took, the lead teacher can create a plan for how to approach cleanup time with Karen. So the teacher might think that Karen has trouble asking for help during cleanup time, or that maybe she needs more positive encouragement during this transition. So the teacher can then design a whole activity, a whole group activity that strengthens the classroom rules and routines about cleaning up. The lead teacher should then share the lesson plan with you so that you know what to expect. If the lead teacher on your team does not often share their plans with you, do not be afraid to ask. It is so important for everyone to be on the same page. The lead teacher may even ask you to take an observation of the lesson so that they can focus on being present. So you can observe how the children react and you can record their conversations, their thoughts, their comments, and that can be really helpful in supporting the lead teacher. Okay, we have made it through the heavy stuff. And it can seem like a lot of work to move from a scrap piece of paper to helping the lead teacher design a lesson plan. But once observations become part of your daily habit, communication and reflection will begin to happen more frequently. So on that note, I'd like to share with you some tips and tricks for taking observations to help you along the way. So when it comes to forming habits, it is always best to start small. Give yourself a goal and decide to take 2 or 3 formal observations a day. Write them down in your notebook, take a video on the iPad, or find one of Karen's pieces of scrap paper on the floor. Taking quick observations throughout the day is a very easy and consistent habit. As you can see on the chart, B is the easy, consistent habit. You won't lose motivation for it, okay? Eventually that habit will become a mindset. So make time to carefully watch your students every single day. How many times have you said to yourself, wow, what a great moment I just saw. I don't need to write that down. I'll just tell my teammates about it tomorrow. Okay? I did that numerous times a day as a teacher. The problem is, by the end of the day, 90% of those moments have left our brains because all we're thinking about is the couch that's waiting for us at home. Paper has a great memory, and paper is not thinking about the couch or the commute home or the weekend camping trip. So keep some paper in your pocket and make it become a habit. Recently, I learned of another strategy which would have been super helpful during my teaching days, and here it is. Keep a blank lesson plan somewhere easily accessible in your classroom. Let's say you are observing a group of children, and something about what they are doing makes a little light bulb go off in your brain. An idea has sparked for an activity that you want to suggest to your teammates based on what these children are interested in. Instead of hoping that you will remember to share this idea later, you can make a beeline for the lesson plan and write in your idea. So you know how the drawing rack in your classroom is often stuffed with paintings and papers from your children, or how the recycle bin is often overflowing with children's work just 2 days after the bin has been emptied? These areas are gold mines for finding evidence of children's learning and development. There have even been moments where I've raided their mailboxes once they have all gone home. searching for papers and projects that I know they had worked on earlier that day. There is no shortage of this type of documentation that can be used as forms of observation. Well, as long as you are providing the materials children need to freely and comfortably express their creativity. Okay, so I had paper and markers out for this picture at the bottom where it says pizza. And one child asked me how to write pizza. So I started writing one letter at a time, and they would write their form of the letter on the paper. And eventually that child just walked away and didn't want to save their work. So I grabbed the iPad, took a quick picture, it took me maybe 30 seconds, and it was done. It was all done for me. Okay, the kid did the work. And the pictures above, one of them was a thank you card we wrote for a visitor in our classroom, and I was able to see, I had each child write their name to sign the card, and then I could easily tell who was able to write their name and where everyone was in terms of their developmental levels when it came to name writing. And the other one, the top right one, was a piece of paper I saw a child working on during the day, and then I watched her put it in her mailbox. So at the end of the day, I pulled it out and took a picture and wrote down that I saw her writing or drawing the picture earlier in the day. So all that you need when you have a picture like this, all you need is a caption or a context for the picture. And voila, you have viable documentation. Make sure you do have an understanding of the context for the work. Any form of picture observation needs some sort of explanation. Because yes, a picture can speak 1,000 words, but those words will not magically enter themselves into TSGs. And now for the fun stuff, homework. It's really not that hard, and I promise you, I really think this will help some of you communicate with your team members if you feel like you are having a hard time talking with them or knowing what is going on in the classroom. I really think this will be helpful in starting some discussion. So first, I want you to ask the lead teachers on your team these questions. How would you like me to support you in the classroom? What times during the day do you need more support with observations? Can you explain in detail one of the activities you have on the lesson plan for next week? And what inspired you to plan that activity? So the lead teachers know part of their homework is to also communicate with you, so they know that you will be coming to them with some questions to start a discussion about the lesson planning process and the lead teacher's thoughts on their planning. So then you're going to record those responses from the lead teacher. Just write them down while you're talking. You can even let them know it's part of your homework, but just write down notes for how they respond and the discussion that you have, and then put those responses from the lead teacher into your PDI folder. And that folder will get turned into the program director at some point, probably at the end of the week or the week after PDI, okay? Thank you for listening to this webinar. I hope that it was super helpful, maybe gave you a refresher on taking observations or provided you some new information that you can use to help take better observations in your classroom.